Hello, hello, honeys. Welcome back to a brand new Beesness. I once again have the buzz for you, this time from January 19th through the 25th, your handpicked headlines. And because we saw a number of juicy ones last week, we're not going to delay any further. We're going to go ahead and get started. We also heard the Louvre issue new overcrowding warnings with a desperate plea for renovation funding. The Louvre's president, Laurence Descartes, previously urgently asked for financial aid from the French government to renovate and restore its building and to better protect its countless works of art. Their newest letter to Culture Minister Rachida Dati, quote, warned that the centuries-old building is in a dire state, end quote, said our sources. The Louvre Palace was built in the late 12th century, and I.M. Pei's famous glass pyramid is also becoming problematically hot due to its greenhouse effects. These are among many problems Descartes points to, which also include water leaks and, quote, worrying temperature swings, which endanger the conservation of works of art, end quote. The Louvre saw a record attendance of 10.2 million visitors in 2018, but only 8.7 million last year, in part because President Descartes, who was appointed in 2021, already instituted a limit of 30,000 visitors per day to address overcrowding. Le Parisien magazine reported that the French President Macron's office, the Culture Ministry, and the Louvre have started serious talks about these conservation concerns, with a source close to Macron's office confirming that, quote, the president has followed this issue with attention for several months, end quote. We'll let you know if/when the Louvre secures that funding after all. And our final follow-up, Frank Lloyd Wright's only skyscraper will be sold, finally, after this legal saga, for $1.4 million. Price Tower, located in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, will be sold for that amount after nearly 6 months of financial mismanagement and legal disputes around said mismanagement. But the shocking part, honeys, is that after all that, it came down to simply a verdict, one from Washington County Judge Russell Vaclaw, who ruled at an emergency hearing on January 21st that the terms of the signed May 2024 sale contract for that $1.4 million between the McFarland Building Company, a Tulsa-based property developer, and the current owners, Copper Tree Green and Green Copper Holdings, aka Copper Entities, that contract had to be enforced. And it is, honeys, the same contract that was used by McFarland to block a proposed October 2024 sale of the building by Copper Entities and its president, Cynthia Blanchard. We're paying attention to how this story ends because the funds from the sale will be withheld from Copper for 2 reasons. That sale contract includes a clause stating that the sale must include all of Price Tower's fixtures and equipment, everything from a rolling directory board to architectural relief panels and armchairs, which Copper Entities allegedly began selling off in August to raise funds to prevent employee layoffs. The problem was this violated a preservation easement for Price Tower owned by the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy, and that started a legal back and forth. Judge Vaclaw's order that any proceeds from the sold furnishings had to be returned or deducted from the sale price resolved this battle. The second reason is concerns about Copper Entities' debts. As of the time of reporting, they stood at nearly $2 million US, and Copper Entities declared bankruptcy on January 22nd, potentially complicating any future proceedings over the funds paid for Price Tower and its operations. We're also interested to see how this sale is going to impact its preservation as well, said Frank Lloyd Wright Executive Director Barbara Gordon in an official statement, quote, the immediate transfer of the Price Tower and its collection to new preservation-minded owners who will honor the easement is absolutely imperative now, end quote, after temperatures tanked in the area back in early January and posed a threat to the building because its utilities had been turned off in August of 2024. The court date to resolve the sale issue was originally set for sometime in February, but was moved up in light of these concerns. Judge Vaclaw's order on January 16th also called for the utilities to be restored, but the order does not seem to have been followed. Some hope remains still. Copper Entities may have failed in its promises is to, quote, safeguard an icon, end quote. But McFarlane Group has previously had success. They developed the Mayo Hotel, an Art Deco building in downtown Tulsa, as well as the Frontier Hotel in Pawhuska, a century-old flatiron-shaped building. We'll see what comes next for the Price Tower. Moving along, a lost miniature by Lavinia Fontana resurfaced at a Texas auction last week. The work in question is a 16th century miniature portrait of an Italian noblewoman who experts believe is Bianca Capello. Capello had an affair with, prior to her marriage to, the Grand Duke of Tuscany, Francesco I de' Medici. It is painted in oil on copper, was likely done between 1580 and 1590, and was one of at least 3 portraits then believed to be of Capello, acquired by the English author and scholar Horace Walpole in the 18th century, though he mistakenly attributed it to the old master painter Bronzino. And no, I do not mean the fish. Walpole was famously infatuated with and excited by Capello's exciting life story, which inspired 2 of his novels, The Castle of Otranto of 1764 and The Mysterious Mother of 1791. The miniature caught the eye of Period Portraits Gallery founder Nick Cox when it turned up at auction recently in Texas. He had a hunch that it might be by Fontana, which was later confirmed in January of 2025 by curator of Italian and Spanish art at the National Gallery of Ireland and Fontana expert Dr. Aoife Brady. The headline caught our attention, honeys, because this work had not been seen for 200 years, and of course its reattribution to Fontana. We cannot stress her importance enough. She was one of the very first women artists to support herself and her family through her successful, lucrative practice as an Italian Mannerist painter. She was especially known for her portrait works of high-profile patrons like aristocrats and popes, as well as for her reputation as the first known woman painter to create female nudes. By the 1580s, she was the first female career artist in Western Europe outside of a convent or court system, and her husband also served as her agent. The painting will be publicly displayed for the first time in over a century at London's Strawberry Hill House from late January through late April of this year. Moving over to the institutional and legal side of things, the Brooklyn Museum said no last week to artists wanting to make a pro-Palestine statement. A group of 22 participants out of 200 total included in the Brooklyn Artists Exhibition, an open call show of artists from the borough timed with the museum's 200th anniversary, are increasing their public calls for the institution to, quote, take a clear public moral stance on Palestine, end quote. Several such artists have been organizing for the duration of the show, October through late January. Multiple of them consented to being named in our sources if you want to know exactly who. In solidarity with these efforts, nearly 24 community groups and local Brooklyn collectives sent a signed open letter to museum leadership last Friday, January 17th, days before the exhibition's public debut, and which urged the institution to, quote, end its silence on the ongoing genocidal violence against the people of Palestine, end quote, among other actions. Very shortly prior to this, our group of 22 had asked to alter the displays of their artworks to hang keffiyehs next to their pieces in what they called a collective artistic intervention. According to one of the artists, the museum declined on the grounds that the artists had formally agreed for the works to be displayed as submitted and said instead that they could choose to remove their artworks from the show. Another, Catherine Teffer, told Hyperallergic, quote, I found this response to be disingenuous because I know artists have changed their works in exhibitions at other venues. Then the museum said that changing the display would open the door to other requests and compared it to displaying Israeli and American flags. This comparison misrepresents our intent. Our request was to show a condemnation of genocide and support for an oppressed people. Waving an Israeli flag during this war shows support for genocide, and an American flag shows patriotism. There is no comparison, end quote. After receiving that no and silence to the open letter, several of the group handed out flyers at the Brooklyn Museum entrance on Saturday, January 18th, with messages about stopping the genocide, and patterned with visual references to keffiyehs. A summary of the situation, as well as the reasons we care about it, seems to be put best in the words of a participant of the efforts, artist Wendy Cohen. She said, quote, I think a lot of museums want the art but not the artist. They want the object but not the person behind it. They want the accolades of working with living artists but not the reality of contending with our voices, end quote. Her words echo those of Nan Anne Golden at her November 2024 retrospective opening speech at the Berlin Museum. She suggested that the museum wanted to show her art but not deal with her recent politics, and seemed to be proven right after she was broadly criticized by German politicians for pro-Palestine statements made in that speech. We also received word last week that the National Gallery of Art has ended its diversity programs. An NGA spokesperson told our sources that the museum has closed its Office of Belonging and Inclusion and is ending its diversity, equity, inclusion programs as a result of an executive order issued by now President Donald Trump on Monday, January 20th, which terminates such initiatives across all federal agencies and entities within 60 days and even refers to them as, quote, illegal and immoral discrimination programs, end quote. The spokesperson claimed that the employees of that office have been reassigned to already vacant positions elsewhere in the museum and has already removed any languages referring to DEI from its website. For example, the words diversity, equity, access, and inclusion have been replaced with, quote, welcoming and accessible, end quote, on a page outlining the institution's mission and values. Honeys, you may be wondering why exactly the National Gallery of Art is also subject to this. It's because the EO requires all federal agencies and departments to end any and all of their DEI efforts, and the NGA was established by Congress in 1937 and receives the majority of its funding from the federal government. Seeing the end of the gallery's efforts is especially disappointing, as it was only 4 years ago that the museum launched an $820,000 rebrand focused on DEI, which included a new logo and signage and a commitment to addressing a lack of diverse leadership and staff. The institution further raised eyebrows last weekend when it hosted a fundraising dinner for the Trump-Vance Inauguration Committee. In response, a representative for the NGA stated that while it, quote, does not typically allow private events, exceptions have been made for official requests from across previous administrations, end quote, specifically pointing to an event held for President Bill Clinton in 1993. Another shocking headline from last week, LA's Broad Museum faces 2 new lawsuits alleging retaliation. Filed within less than a week of each other, each accuses the institution of discrimination and defamation, as well as failing to prevent retaliation against the 2 workers who filed. The first suit was filed by the museum's former HR director, Darren Rezel Walker. He claims that he was pressured by the museum's former COO, Alyssa Gerlach, to fire facilities manager Rick Mitchell, age 65, based on personal animosity, Mitchell's age, and his race. Walker alleges he was dismissed by Gerlach after failing to find cause for Mitchell's termination following an investigation into the latter's department after Mitchell asked for safety standards to be reviewed. The second suit was filed by Rick Mitchell himself, who joined the museum in 2015 and mostly accuses the former COO, who joined in 2022 and left the museum in September of 2024, of both age and racial biases. It agrees that Gerlach requested an internal investigation of his department that was conducted by Walker and that no wrongdoing was discovered. Mitchell thus claims Gerlach violated the law by making up a reason for his firing, that she committed defamation by allegedly making false claims about Mitchell's job performance, and that Gerlach was hostile towards Mitchell, describing him unfavorably to other staff. Both suits additionally claim that the museum failed to prevent retaliation against the 2 men. The Broad, of course, has denied these allegations, and our sources say it claims to have followed proper processes and will defend itself in court. News also broke that nude drawings of Hindu gods were seized from an Indian gallery displaying them. On January 22nd, the Delhi High Court approved the seizure of 2 artworks by the renowned late artist Maqbool Fida, or MF, Hussain from the Delhi Art Gallery, or DAG, in New Delhi after a court-affiliated visitor complained that they, quote, outraged religious feelings, end quote. A brief description of the works in question. One depicts the elephant god Ganesh with a nude woman seated on his knee. The other features an apparently nude rendition of the monkey god Hanuman holding a naked woman in his hand with his tail wrapped around the neck of an attacker. The artist himself was raised Muslim, yet his creative practice shows a visual curiosity for other religious faiths as well as a commitment to artistic freedom. Say our sources, quote, while he was among the highest paid, nationally awarded, and most revered artists of India, he was also widely criticized for his portrayals of nudity and sexuality among Hindu gods. goddesses throughout his artwork, end quote. Our complainant is Amita Sachdeva, an advocate for the Delhi High Court who publicized her complaints early last December about the presence of these artworks in the solo presentation, only about a week before its close date. She then proceeded to file a legal complaint alleging the works were offensive. Her legal complaint claimed that the works violated Clause 299, referring to, quote, deliberate and malicious acts intended to outrage religious feeling of any class by insulting its religion or religious beliefs, end quote, of Bharatiya Nyaya Samhita, BNS, the official criminal code of India, which only came into effect in July 2024 and which replaced the Indian Penal Code placed since 1860. So, honeys, what now and what next? A spokesperson for the DAG wrote in statements to our sources that given its, quote, implicit belief in artistic freedom, the gallery denies any wrongdoing as alleged by the complainant, who has publicly claimed to be principally driven by a religious agenda, end quote. They added they've complied with all aspects of the investigation, including handing over security camera footage as well as other evidence upon request. Still, there's a confusing future ahead here. The presiding judge over the case at this point allowed these investigating officers to proceed with the artwork seizure, but also dismissed the application for a written police document initiating a criminal investigation because essentially they couldn't find any evidence of an offense. This means that Sachdeva may proceed with a complaint case if she wants, but that the matter will not be investigated any further by the state. As for what will happen to Hussein's drawings, whether they will be returned to the gallery, TBD. Just a few funky announcements and discoveries this week. First, the moon was named an endangered site by the World Monuments Fund for the first time ever. Also known as the WMF, it compiles a list each year of heritage sites it deems at risk in order to build awareness and mobilize action. The nonprofit's 2025 World Monuments Watch List features 25 sites spanning 5 continents and now also space, all in danger from factors ranging climate change, natural disasters, over-tourism, and many more. So, why the moon? WMF points out that its surface holds more than 90 historic sites which call for protection, especially amid increasing space activity. The footprints and artifacts that humans have left behind since 1969, WMF noted, quote, represent humankind's most extraordinary feats of science, ingenuity, and courage, end quote. WMF President and CEO Bénédicte de Montlaur says, quote, the inclusion of the moon underscores the universal need for proactive and cooperative strategies to protect heritage, whether on Earth or beyond, that reflect and safeguard our collective narrative, end quote. We learned that, amid controversy, a statue of Peru's Spanish conqueror Pizarro was restored to central Lima. The imposing bronze of Pizarro on horseback was re-inaugurated on Saturday as part of celebrations marking the 490th anniversary of the Peruvian capital city's foundation near its former spot in Lima's main square, 22 years after the statue's removal. The Italian Renaissance-inspired sculpture of Pizarro stands 5 meters tall and weighs 7 tons. Just a little bit of context info for the honeys who are unfamiliar here. Pizarro infamously captured the Inca emperor Atahualpa in 1532 and held him for ransom until the room in which the emperor was held was filled with gold and silver, then had him executed the following year. After sacking the capital of the Inca Empire, Cusco, Pizarro founded Lima in 1535. Notably, as the statue was unveiled by Lima's far-right mayor, Rafael López Aliaga, and the regional president of Madrid, Isabel Díaz Ayuso, a conservative Spanish politician, invited to mark the city's anniversary, that main square was closed off to the public and guarded by police. Among other statements made at its installment, Díaz Ayuso said the statue's relocation meant, quote, the reunion of the statue of Pizarro with the historical heart of Lima, end quote, and therefore showed respect for its history. But as you may guess, honeys, we're covering this story because to the people of Lima, it's giving an attempt to rehabilitate Pizarro's legacy. Many see this as a symbolic vindication of the conquistador, and it's provoked mixed reactions in a country that's still deeply divided along racial and class lines, according to our sources. As the speeches were being made, for example, a small group of protesters blew traditional Andean wind instruments made from conch shells and shouted, "Out with Pizarro," end quote. And finally, honeys, 2 short obituaries this week. First, Jules Feiffer, Pulitzer Prize-winning cartoonist and playwright who passed at 95. On January 17th, he passed of congestive heart failure at his home in New York. He received the Pulitzer for editorial cartooning in 1986 and several other prestigious awards, and in 1995 was elected into the American Academy of Arts and Letters. And painter of radical figuration Jo Bayer died at age 95 as well. Her passing on January 21st in Amsterdam was announced by Pace Gallery, which has represented her since 2019. Hyperallergic writes that Bayer initially rose to prominence during the growing yet male-dominated minimalism movement of the 1960s and 70s before, quote, rejecting the art form in favor of more experimental and figurative compositions, widely recognized for a pioneering painting practice that continually transformed over the course of a 6-decade career that never slowed, end quote. I think that's enough for the week, honeys. We'll leave it there. Be sure to tune in for our All Things Rococo episode, which will be dropping on Thursday. And in the meantime, take care, stay warm, hydrate or dihydrate, all that good stuff. We'll talk soon. This podcast is produced, created, hosted, formerly edited, and fact-checked by master's degree holder Celia Bugno. Chris Meinhold is responsible for our editing, mixing, and our intro and outro music. Special thanks to him for that. And as always, remember to like, subscribe, share, comment, so on all your favorite listening as well as social media channels.